welcome back to my channel, where I talk about retro pop culture, obscure media, and other curiosities. And where, while the weather is permitting, I wear cool sweaters. This is the second video I've done in one of my sweaters. I have a bunch of cool sweaters, but it's usually too hot here to wear them. But I'm one of those people who thrives in the cold, so while it's freezing and snowy here in Texas, I have shut off my heater and put on my sweaters. I got this sweater from a little shop called Bison Wears. I got this from a Kickstarter they did. They had a couple of other ones I liked. Like, they had one that was like this, like one of those 80s arcade carpet patterns. But I could only afford one, and I had to go with the Archaeopteryx Berlin specimen, because who doesn't love this fossil? Today's topic is one I'm very excited for because I think it is long past time we gave Dinotopia its due. I've seen a couple of Dinotopia videos floating around on YouTube, but I haven't seen a whole lot. A channel I love, Dino Diego, has a great little series called Exploring the World of Dinotopia that I do have linked below. But I really wanted to make my own video so that I could talk about the parts of Dinotopia that I wanted to explore, which are a little bit different from just a general series overview. This video is going to serve not only as a brief exploration of the Dinotopia franchise, but also as a meditation on what makes it truly unique among dinosaur media, and really unique among fantasy media in general. This video is a little more analytical than some of my past goofy fun stuff has been. I think that Dinotopia really deserves to be remembered and respected for the amazing work of art that it is, and for the way that it approaches some very existential themes regarding the human experience. And if that sounds a little bit too serious and deep for a series about talking dinosaurs, just wait. No super long intro this time, we're just going to jump right into it. Thank you for watching, thank you for supporting the channel. Now let's talk about philosophy, industrialization, and talking dinosaurs. Unless you specifically searched for this video, there's a good chance you don't actually know a whole lot about Dinotopia. And that's perfectly fine because the rest of the world doesn't either, apparently. Dinotopia started with a series of books, the first being Dinotopia, A Land Apart from Time, published in 1992. There are 3 or 4 books in the main series, depending on whether or not you count First Flight as part of the main series. Those books are A Land Apart from Time in 1992, The World Beneath in 1995, First Flight in 1999, a prequel about the first Skybax writer that included a board game, and Journey to Chandara in 2007. What makes these books interesting, with maybe the exception of First Flight, is that they're not really fantasy novels or even storybooks. While they do include text like a long storybook, they're primarily a collection of illustrations meant for deep world building, and include not only painted scenes, but graphs, charts, maps, and engineering blueprints. They're done in the style of a 19th century explorer's journal, supposedly penned by a man named Arthur Denison after he and his son Will are shipwrecked on the shores of an island populated by humans and sapient dinosaurs. The books don't really follow a narrative. There is no big bad guy to be defeated or sweeping interpersonal drama, just a series of short exploratory adventures mostly undertaken by Arthur. Later installments in the series, such as the 16 Dinotopia Digest chapter books and the 2 Alan Dean Foster novels, include small standalone stories, but there's never really an overarching plot. The TV series, which we are going to be talking about in a later segment, does follow more of a structured narrative, but as we're going to see, I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. It's a very artistic and experimental series, and I think the idyllic nature of Dinotopia might come from the fact that this world wasn't created by an author or a director, but by an artist. James Gurney was born in California in 1958 and started drawing at a young age, teaching himself by studying the works of Howard Pyle and Norman Rockwell. His upbringing is largely responsible for the more mechanical elements of Gurney's work. According to Gurney, making stuff was just expected in my family. My dad was a mechanical engineer, and I grew up in a house with a big workshop and a lot of tools. If you wanted to make a kite, you had to rip the kite sticks from spruce on the table saw. I made my own kites and electric-powered tugboats and hand puppets, all based on how-to books that I checked out of the library. The influence of Gurney's professional life outside of writing is also very apparent in the series itself. He was an archaeology major at UC Berkeley, a background painter for the Bakshi and Frazetta animated film Fire and Ice, and he went on to do illustrations for National Geographic. It was while working for Nat Geo that he was inspired to create the first paintings of Dinotopia, Waterfall City in 1988 and the iconic Dinosaur Parade in 1989. The creation of Dinotopia was a direct response to the paleoscientific scene of the 1990s. The 90s were a really important time for paleoscience in particular. Sometimes called the dinosaur renaissance, this was a period when advancements in the field were fundamentally changing the way we thought about dinosaurs. Ever notice how depictions of T-Rex changed drastically after about 1991? It wasn't just because of Jurassic Park, although strangely enough, the Jurassic Park movies had a direct effect on paleoscience itself. It's because during the dinosaur renaissance, trailblazers like John Horner and Robert Bakker were pushing theories and discoveries that changed our view of dinosaurs from big, dumb lizards to dynamic, active animals who inhabited a vibrant and living world. While Jurassic Park took the more terrifying implications of intelligent dinosaurs and let them run amok, Gurney took the more fantastical approach and made intelligent dinosaurs peaceful. Dinotopia is an entirely harmonious society, especially in contrast to the other fictional depictions of dinosaurs that came out of the dinosaur renaissance. It's also a marked deviation from the norm in fantasy media in general, especially during the 90s. Speaking on the Dinotopian creed that weapons are enemies even to their owners, Gurney said, "I focused on that maxim more as a reaction to the militarization of fantasy and science fiction in so many fantasy worlds that I had grown up with, including Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. The endless battles became, frankly, too predictable and boring. I found it to be much fresher and more difficult to envision a world that had figured out how to live peacefully." Gurney's love of nature and passion for exploration and engineering are apparent throughout the series. One of the coolest things about Dinotopia is that every little detail, no matter how small, is very carefully thought out and researched. For example, while designing the workings of a Dinotopian fire engine, Gurney actually got the input of a fire engine designer. Man, what a job title, fire engine designer, to make sure his idea was accurate and workable. His paleoscience is also carefully researched to remain up to date, which is one of the reasons that Dinotopia has so much more than the usual 5 or 6 popular species. The third book, Journey to Chandara, was in the works when a lot of new species were being discovered. So we get all kinds of cool new animals in there, including Caudipteryx, Therizinosaurus, and Microraptor. Gurney was also very deliberate with the themes employed throughout the series. He wanted to explore a world where humans and nature, and especially an ancient natural species, had found a way to live together in harmony. This is a major disruption to the status quo when it comes to fantasy media, and especially dinosaur media. And that's why I think this otherwise quiet and kind of boring concept works so well and is so powerfully affecting. Dinosaur media is endlessly fascinating to me. And not even necessarily because of the dinosaurs, although I do love dinosaurs. Because humans, as a general rule, really love dinosaurs. Not prehistoria, but specifically dinosaurs. Most people will not be able to tell you what their favorite Cenozoic mammal is, but ask anybody on the street what their favorite dinosaur is, and they'll probably have an answer for you that stretches far back to their childhood, whether or not they were a certified dino kid. Dinosaurs are deeply ingrained in our collective subconscious. We are all awed and fascinated by them on some level. Something about their previous existence on this earth speaks to our present existence, and it makes us want to tell stories about them. But for some reason, most of those stories are the same story. Because as much as we love dinosaurs, we are terrified of them. Maybe it's a deeply buried trace of our own evolutionary history, a natural fear of a large predator that is still hanging around in our brains after millions of years. Maybe it's that they are so far removed from anything we have on Earth today that they just feel alien and monstrous. Or maybe it's just because we all saw the same hunting scene in a museum exhibit as a kid and never really got over it. But the vast majority of dinosaur media share the same overarching theme: fear. Fear of the natural world, fear of monsters, fear of our own destructive human nature. This fear is something we come to expect of media involving dinosaurs. Even more neutral media and stories from the saurian perspective have this theme of violence and danger. Take The Land Before Time, for example. Also, peep my little Land Before Time and Jurassic Park crossover print back here. This is a kid series where the dinosaurs are cute and lovable and they're not running around trying to eat Jeff Goldblum. But things are trying to eat them. There are tar pits, volcanoes, disease, all the perils of being a wild animal but in a prehistoric setting. The same goes for other kids' anthro-dinosaur series such as The Deadlands. In this book series, the herbivorous dinosaurs are at violent war with each other because the evil carnivores have created a manufactured conflict to keep themselves in power. Yes, this is a recent American series, for those of you about to ask. Uncertainty and danger is a staple of these stories because we see the prehistoric world as being full of uncertainty and danger. Media where dinosaurs and humans mix is, unsurprisingly, even more violent. Even stories where dinosaurs and humans seem to be living alongside each other are just a disaster waiting to happen. Jurassic Park is the obvious example here. I could talk for hours about the environmental and feminist subtext of Jurassic Park, and one day I probably will, but just skimming the surface, Jurassic Park's most in-your-face message is that control is an illusion, especially when it comes to mankind's collective hubris. A lot of dinosaur media has that central theme of nature being uncontrollable and unpredictable, and of things always reverting back to the natural order of us versus them. Whoever them may be. Dinosaur media is primitive and primal, both literally and figuratively. Dinosaur media also tends to be hyper-masculine in its presentation. Now, I'm not going to get into the persistent gender and racial disparity we see in paleontology because that topic is just way too big to tackle here. But I can tell you that as a kid and even as an adult, I've always felt a little bit unwelcome in paleontological spaces because I'm not a man. It does exist, and it's very present in dinosaur media fandom. Think about the uproar that happened on social media when Camp Cretaceous came out, and there were an equal number of female to male and white to POC characters. Or when that ARC animated series was released and the main character was female. Because dinosaur media is often gritty and hyper-violent, it's marketed mostly to men and boys, who supposedly want gritty and hyper-violent, so the cycle just continues. All of this paints a very clear picture of what dinosaur media is supposed to be. Violent, primal, masculine, and alien, with danger and chaos around every turn. Enter Dinotopia. Because Dinotopia is the exact opposite of literally everything that I have just mentioned. Dinotopia is a lost island full of dinosaurs, but this is no Isla Sorna. This is a paradise where dinosaurs and humans coexist harmoniously. And not only that, they've built a perfect utopia, an Eden where all can live peacefully and equally. And what makes this world so markedly different from other fictional utopias is that it's not a utopia in spite of the prehistoric monsters in their midst, but because of them. The books take place during the mid to late 19th century, but by that time, dinosaur, if not Dinotopian, society was already incredibly old. Even the humans already living there are relative newcomers, with the first humans arriving around 4000 BC, I think was what the book said. By that time, the dinosaurs had already been living on this island for millions of years. So the society we see in the books looks very different from any existing human society, because it wasn't built by humans, but by dinosaurs. On Dinotopia, there is no economic disparity because there is no currency. Dinosaurs have no use for gold coins, so their economy is powered entirely by barter, not only of objects, but of one's time or energy. There is no gender or racial inequality because dinosaurs have no concept of gender or racial superiority. There is no pollution, no waste, no environmental disruption of any kind. Because dinosaurs have been living off the land for millions of years, and they have perfected the art of caring for the land they live on for the benefit of all. They even view death from a cyclical and positive perspective, giving their bodies to the carnivores living in the rainy basin at the end of their lifespan, so that their bodies are cleanly disposed of and put to good use. The dinosaurs in these books are a highly evolved, almost enlightened species, and they pass their wisdom to the human inhabitants in order to better everyone's collective existence. They've been around for millions of years, and much like their fossilized counterparts in our world, have watched the rise and fall of countless human empires. They are the wisest and most experienced of all creatures, and the perfect sages to bring those humans lucky enough to encounter them into an age of greater enlightenment. In order to explain to you the brilliance of this concept, I want to remind you of the extreme real-world difference between the reign of dinosaurs and the reign of man. The Cretaceous Paleogene, or KT, extinction event happened roughly 65 or 66 million years ago. Before that, dinosaurs existed on Earth for about 165 million years. And depending on if you want to include birds in this, they're still around, so you can add that 65 million back in. In comparison, Homo sapiens at its oldest has only been around for about 300,000 years. There is no contest as to which empire had the longest and most powerful dynasty, which is what makes this concept of enlightened sapient dinosaurs teaching humans how best to live work so well. One of the things that tends to happen in dinosaur media, especially media inspired by Jurassic Park, is humans think they know better than Mother Nature, so they act on their human pride and stupidity, and chaos ensues. As a huge Jurassic Park fan, there is definitely a place for this kind of story in paleofiction, and I think it is a very important and timely message. But so is the Dinotopian message. In this series, humanity comes face to face with an existence far older and more experienced than itself, and lacking any other option because they're shipwrecked on an isolated island, is forced to learn from it and become better for it. According to Gurney, we humans are discovering that we can learn something from the animals around us. Dinosaurs are my vehicle for that journey of discovering the harmony of nature. And considering that dinosaurs were the reigning beings on this earth for 165 million years, and humans have only been in relative control for maybe a fraction of that, and we've already screwed things up past the point of no return, I think dinosaurs are the perfect vessel for teaching humans harmony. It's not only the philosophies of peace, balance, and conscious living that the Dinotopian way encourages. There's also heavy discussion of industrialization and the ill effects of capitalism and unchecked technological advances. As seen in The World Beneath and First Flight, Dinotopians have a healthy fear of and respect for technology and industrialization, and these themes are a major driving force in the world's inner workings. Says Gurney, as the son, grandson, and great-grandson of tinkerers, engineers, and inventors, I've always been fascinated by technology. In particular, I'm interested in how every obvious benefit of a new technological invention is counterbalanced by an invisible cost or compromise that may take a generation or two to recognize. If there was a period when we might have really taken stock and considered the future more judiciously, it would have been at the advent of electricity, mass production, automobiles, airplanes, and modern communications. In other words, about 150 years ago, the time period Dinotopia is set in. It's still recent enough and familiar enough to relate to, but it puts our modern dilemmas in some context. Technology in Dinotopia must always serve a practical purpose and be harmless to the surrounding environment. In The World Beneath, Arthur invents a robotic transport that destroys plant life and frightens dinosaurs, and has ultimately decided that the novelty of invention isn't worth harming the peaceful world around them. In First Flight, we learn about the lost Dinotopian civilization of Poseidos, where technology was allowed to continue to the point where it nearly destroyed their entire society. Technology in this world is not something that can exist just for the sake of existing. The consequences for everything and everyone who come into contact with it must be considered. Instead of causing society to stall, the strict rules on technology and industrialization force conscious ingenuity and creativity, where invention and progression are encouraged but through a more thoughtful and careful lens. Technology in Dinotopia does exist, but it works in careful harmony with the natural world, and it must serve a practical purpose that betters life in some way. For example, inventions such as scroll readers, clean airships, and submersibles are permitted as they allow for accessibility and exploration without causing undue harm. Industrialization is a largely capitalist ideal, and the Dinotopian view on capitalism is explored through its economy, which, as I mentioned before, is entirely barter-based. With a barter-based economy, capital is not given to titans of industry or technology because they don't exist, because there is no capital to be gained from it. The economy in Dinotopia is entirely based on trade, with people trading crops, handmade goods, and even their time and energy. This entirely negates any form of economic disparity. The Dinotopians believe that everyone has a skill or a use, and as long as that skill is being used to better their society, you deserve to have a home and food to eat. It's explained in the series that this is why the arts flourish in Dinotopia. The arts and entertainment are skills that are valued, so artisans and entertainers are able to make a living with their craft. The social philosophy of Dinotopia is another part of what makes it such an outlier in the world of fantasy. Dinosauria is an incredibly diverse clade, and the dinosaurs realize that their diversity is what makes them strong. They value the abilities of the different species. The sauropod's strength, the dromaeosaur's dexterity and intelligence, the hadrosaur's musical abilities, and how they all work together to strengthen their society. They pass this wisdom to the human population, which is shown to be incredibly diverse since most of the humans are descended from shipwreck survivors from all over the world. Following the Saurian example, all of these different races work and live together in harmony. Their cultures blending over the centuries to create a uniquely Dinotopian culture that is a fusion of all of these pre-existing human cultures from all over the world. They even have their own language, which Arthur Dennison describes as sounding like a blend of many different human languages. Gurney's artwork does an incredible job of showing this unique culture that has evolved from pieces of many existing cultures. The architecture in the various cities is a shockingly well-planned blend of building styles from all over the world, and the fashion seen on the human and dinosaur inhabitants takes inspiration from every culture imaginable. It's like World Market meets your local Ren Fair meets a more flowery version of Global Village Coffee House. And when you consider that many of the more global aesthetics of the 1990s were born as a reaction to the new technology age, this unique aesthetic makes sense in more ways than one. Total harmony and respect for nature and for one another is an important staple of Dinotopian society, and that respect even extends to those who live differently from major cities. The carnivores of the Rainy Basin are one of my favorite aspects of this series because the way carnivores are treated in this series makes more logical sense than almost any other story involving sapient carnivores. Sidebar, carnivores in fiction, and especially quote-unquote monstrous carnivores like theropod dinosaurs, always get a bad rap. They're mindlessly evil eating machines who don't act like real animals, and that drives me crazy. Real carnivores won't risk wasting precious energy on a meal that isn't certain, and they're certainly not going to chase prey through multiple deadly traps over miles and miles for what amounts to like 2 bites. I know, the theropods in Jurassic Park don't count because they're genetically engineered and so they don't act like real animals, but other than that, this is a major oversight in almost every story involving a predator. Real carnivores are not always, but often are less dangerous than herbivores, who tend to view everything as either a threat to their life or to their territory. You're more likely to get hurt by a moose than a bear, but for some reason we're all just totally comfortable with petting a strange triceratops. So how do carnivores in Dinotopia work? Well, the small carnivores, like dromaeosaurs, subsist on a diet of fish and small reptiles, and are able to integrate into greater Dinotopian society. The large theropods, however, live a semi-isolated existence in the Rainy Basin, a stretch of rainforest on the outskirts of Dinotopia. It's explained in the chapter books in the Alan Dean Foster novel Dinotopia Lost that these theropods aren't evil, primitive, or mindless. They just choose to live outside of civilization according to the code their ancestors lived by. While they do sometimes prey on caravans who wander into the Rainy Basin, they can be easily warded off with tributes of fish and usually keep to themselves. In Dinotopia Lost, it's explained that one of their main sources of food is elderly dinosaurs, and that it's considered a great spiritual honor to make a pilgrimage to the Rainy Basin at the end of one's natural lifespan to feed the theropods. Or alternately, the pteranodons, who also serve an important purpose as guardians of the world beneath. In this way, the carnivores perform an important service, that of clean body disposal for these massive animals that would otherwise take forever to decompose on their own. The theropods are also highly respected for their strong sense of honor and justice, and they can even be helpful and possess their own unique wisdom that is valued. Something I was very pleasantly surprised to see in the animated kids movie, Quest for the Ruby Sunstone, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. I love this presentation of carnivores, and especially of large theropods, as honorable creatures. Think about the T-Rex for a second. The Tyrannosaurus Rex is possibly one of the most awe-inspiring creatures to have ever walked the earth. I think few people have seen a Rex skeleton and not been deeply affected by the sheer beauty inherent in their ferocity. There's a reason we all get chills every time Rexy roars. When you think about the fact that the Rex was the proverbial king of beasts for nearly 2.5 million years, you can't help but to come away with the anthropomorphized sense of this animal being somehow wise and noble. Almost like the way we spiritually view wolves or big cats as being symbols of nobility and honor, the Tyrannosaurus rex feels like the prehistoric version of that. And I love that Dinotopia put its theropods in that position and lets them carry that sense of nobility and honor. They are still dangerous, yes, but they serve an important purpose within their society, and they're highly respected and even revered. Dinotopian society and philosophy was very carefully designed to be harmonious. It's a utopia where prehistoric wisdom and the nurturing spirit of the natural world is utilized and honored, and it paints a beautiful picture, both literally and figuratively, of what human society could be if we would only honor the incredible world that we're given. Which is my segue into talking about the Dinotopia TV series. In preparation for this video, I challenged myself to watch and read every piece of Dinotopian media so that I could have the fullest possible picture of the world I wanted to talk about. Now, for the sake of honesty, I'm going to go ahead and say that I did not fully succeed in that. I couldn't find a copy of Hand of Dinotopia for less than like $30 because it's been out of print for years. And I read about half of the chapter book series before I decided that everything there matched up with the content of the original books, and I was just kind of spinning my wheels. But I did watch every bit of film, including playthroughs of the Dinotopia video games. I'm pretty sure I was the first person in about 12 years to check those DVDs out from the library. They were in really rough shape. And honestly, watching every bit of filmed Dinotopia media was a sacrifice in and of itself. So, starting from the beginning. In 2002, Hallmark released a 3-part Dinotopia miniseries, or what they called a mega series, because I guess they thought it sounded cooler. And as an aside, there are 2 Dinotopia TV series. There's the 3-part miniseries, or mega series, whatever, and then there's a 13-episode TV series. I'm referring to them as the mini-series and the TV series, respectively. I'm sorry, I know that's confusing. Anyway, the mini-series aired on ABC's The Wonderful World of Disney programming block in May 2002. It had fairly moderate reviews from what I can tell from hunting around online. People back in 2002 liked the visual effects, but thought the story wasn't very well fleshed out, but it wasn't universally despised or anything. In fact, people with no prior exposure to Dinotopia seemed to like it. Did I like it? So the Dinotopia miniseries has some pretty major differences from the books. That wouldn't be such a big deal, especially considering that the books don't really have a plot for a TV show to follow, except that the changes they made fundamentally change the spirit of Dinotopia. So it starts off with a guy and his 2 sons, who are half-siblings, crashing their plane in the middle of a thunderstorm because they crossed the Bermuda Triangle-like barrier into Dinotopian waters. The dad drowns, and the 2 kids, who are just Oscar-worthy actors, let me tell you, like, the line delivery is just so natural and not stiff or weird at all.
I think the rules here are different, and we better start learning them.
I don't believe it. This can't be happening. How can we be here, alone, on top of the world, and my brother is sending you singograms? That is so typical.
The 2 kids, David and Carl, played by Wentworth Miller and Tyron Laetzo, respectively, survive the crash and end up on Dinotopia, where they meet the obligatory useless sci-fi princess character Marion, played by the absolutely adorable Katie Carr. They're introduced to Dinotopian society, which at first glance mirrors the society seen in the books. We're introduced to a few other characters, including Zippo, who's described as a Stenonchosaurus, but his uncanniness reminds me more of Jar Jar Binks. Oh, speaking of Jar Jar Binks, just off topic here for a moment, did you know there was a big dust-up over some scenes of Naboo in The Phantom Menace looking exactly like Waterfall City? Like, to the point where people were telling James Gurney that he needed to get a lawyer and sue the pants off of George Lucas. What happened was, before either of these projects came out, Lucas's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, was in talks to produce the special effects for a separate Dinotopia film that was never made. So Lucas saw and even developed some of the design elements for that project, and it's believed that a lot of those elements were recycled into the Naboo scenes. Now, James Gurney has been really chill about this whole situation. Like, he didn't really seem to have a problem with it and said he has no intention of going after anyone, which, good for him. Honestly, as someone who doesn't give George Lucas an inch on anything, I don't really see the problem here and think it's kind of a non-issue. Artists often take inspiration from the same things, and while there is a really strong resemblance, especially when you look at them side by side, I think a lot of that resemblance comes from the heavy Art Nouveau inspiration that both designs utilize, and it's actually kind of cool. Anyway, I just needed to mention that story in there somewhere. Back to the miniseries. So, new characters. Zippo, who would have been much less terrifying as a puppet. There's also Cyrus Crab, the son of minor nuisance Lee Crab from the books, who's played by David Thewlis, who I was just so happy to see. Made me feel better about what I was getting myself into. Sounds mostly fine so far. I mean, it's lacking some of the colorful beauty of the books, but, you know, special effects budget limitations, that's not such a problem. Everything's fine so far, but oh no! The Sunstones are failing! And that's a really huge deal for some reason, and could cause the collapse of Dinotopian civilization as we know it. Now, if, like me, you came to the series from the books, you're probably very confused. Because in the books, sunstones are barely mentioned. They're a somewhat plot point in The World Beneath and First Flight, but they're not like the hinge on which all of Dinotopia rests. They're these pseudo-magical crystals that kind of work like batteries or solar panels. They soak up sunlight and transform it into different types of energy. There are rumors that they have magical powers, and some people believe that they can even, like, protect people from carnivores, but that's not true, and they're not like the cornerstone of Dinotopian society. So I was pretty confused as to why the Sunstones failing meant widespread destruction and disaster. Well, everything changed when the carnivores attacked. That's right, in both the miniseries and TV series, the Sunstones protect the good citizens of Dinotopia from the mindlessly evil eating machines that live on the outskirts. Because they're magical and good and pure, and the carnivores are not. And if the Sunstones fail, the carnivores just go into Pac-Man mode and run around eating everything in sight. Now look, I get it. Jurassic Park 3 just came out, people want movie monsters, and you need some kind of conflict for the series to have a story to tell. And usually I wouldn't get this up in arms about predators being portrayed as monstrous or evil in fiction. It is a problem with demonstrably real-world ramifications for living animals, but it's not something to go to war over. The problem is that putting it into Dinotopia specifically fundamentally changes how this universe works and makes it a whole lot worse. There's a concept in fantasy known as the always evil race, sometimes known as the always chaotic evil trope. It's where you have a race or a species in a fictional universe that is made up entirely of evil beings. Orcs and goblins in Lord of the Rings, usually Drow fall into this trope, Daleks, Germans, that kind of thing. It's a very common trope, and it's one that a lot of people, myself included, are critical of. For one thing, it's lazy writing. It limits the kind of stories that can be told about that species and demands a much higher level of suspension of disbelief from the reader. I can hear you now. Oh my god, are you saying the show about talking dinosaurs is racist because the predators eat meat? They're not even humanoid. No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think the dinosaurs are racist. I'm just saying it strikes me as odd and as bad world building that the herbivorous dinosaurs are shown to be just as sapient as their book counterparts. But the carnivores, who remember in the books were dangerous but were also respected, noble, and honorable, don't seem to have any conscious thought at all other than eat, pray, kill, despite the fact that they're all in the same evolutionary family and are essentially the same species. I'm going to reiterate that there is nothing wrong with entertainment being entertainment. Not everything has to have a deep symbolic message or exist in a philosophically unique world. I'm a big believer that it is perfectly fine for media to just be fun, and that people who try to parse deep meaning out of everything they interact with have kind of just lost the plot. My problem is with this trope being present very specifically in Dinotopia, because Dinotopia has established meaningful world building that an always chaotic evil race, especially of carnivorous theropods, breaks. Because even in the miniseries, this is a civilization based on diversity and harmony that has set itself apart from the rest of the world and therefore from its biases. Introducing the always evil race into Dinotopia is not only lazy writing, but it also flies directly in the face of this world that Gurney has created. Also, I'm pretty sure they literally said in the books that sunstones won't keep carnivores away. And considering in the books the carnivores were tasked with protecting the place where the sunstones were found, that's another pretty big oversight. Plus, it throws us right back into the loud, violent, danger around every turn type of dinosaur media that Dinotopia was supposed to be a subversion of. And again, I understand that TV audiences want action and spectacle. But you can do that without throwing all of the important world-building elements under the bus. Dinotopia Lost is a really good example of that. In this book by sci-fi veteran Alan Dean Foster, the isolation and secret existence of Dinotopia is threatened when pirates are shipwrecked on the island and start kidnapping dinosaurs, including a baby T-Rex. This book keeps all the elements of the original Gurney books perfectly intact, but introduces a real threat that has to be dealt with, and has plenty of action and adventure, including a few carnivorous dino kills. Something like this would have been perfect for introducing TV audiences to the world and keeping them entertained without changing how the world works. So, obviously, I wasn't thrilled with this very big change in the story, but there's a lot of little things in the miniseries that change the spirit of Dinotopia as well. For one thing, it's very white.
They number thousands from all corners of the earth, from every century, and we are their descendants.
The books make it pretty obvious that this is a very diverse society. Lots of different kinds of dinosaurs and people. And I understand the budgetary limitations of CGI modeling this many different species of dinosaurs. That's fine, that makes sense. But it does annoy me that all of the main characters are white, and most of the background characters are too. What really gets me is that the human members of the governing council in the TV series are all white men except for Rosemary, who barely even speaks at the council meetings. You really expect me to believe that this utopian society is led by a bunch of old white guys? The American political system begs to differ. It's also very male. There are two female characters, Marion and her mother Rosemary, and neither one of them do very much. Sure, Marion goes on the quest to find more sunstones with David and Carl, but she mostly runs around and screams a lot, and when she goes to replace the main sunstone, she falls down and drops it, and a male character has to finish the job for her. Not even a human male, it's a CGI dinosaur. Will Dennison's daughter, Romana, is shown for like 2 scenes, and it's such a waste because, come on. The daughter of legendary Skybox writer Will Dennison gets 2 scenes, and the rest of the time we're watching this guy ride a dinosaur mechanical bull. It's kind of like having the daughter of Luke Skywalker available, and instead of focusing on her, you spend all your time following around a Gary Stu who's afraid of heights. This is an example of the self-fulfilling dinosaurs are for boys prophecy that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. If any series was to include girls who enjoy dinosaurs, I'd think it would be Dinotopia, with its sociological themes and egalitarian society. But no, we get 2 white dudes saving the day from mindless movie monsters instead. Groundbreaking. Also, the barter system seems to be gone. It's very strange. It looks like most things in Dinotopia are free, but the messenger birds, who used to be dimorphodons but are now just birds, talk about needing payment, and Cyrus also demands payment for his wares, and there's general talk of money. Also in the TV series, a major plot point of one episode is the boys not being able to afford to buy something. And in several episodes, you hear money referred to in numbers and amounts, if not units. And since these 2 iterations exist in the same version of Dinotopia, we can assume that money is in fact a thing here. Which, again, that's no longer a true utopian society if it allows for economic disparity and privilege. There also isn't a lot of interaction between humans and dinosaurs that doesn't include carnivorous dinosaur threats. Like, you see dinosaurs alongside humans in a lot of scenes, but we don't really get the sense that they are a vital part of this society, and certainly not that they're the founders and spiritual leaders of the civilization. You have a couple of talking dinosaurs like Zippo, but it's mostly dinosaurs in the background being used as beasts of burden or just as set dressing. Whereas in the books, dinosaurs gladly fulfilled a lot of important roles for their human friends, including nursemaids, farmhands, scribes, and translators. I can forgive this a little more than my other complaints though, since this was a TV special and budget restraints around CGI and special effects are something that studios have to contend with. It was just more than a little disappointing to miss out on the symbiotic relationship we saw in the books. Now, the miniseries isn't all bad. I like the art direction for the most part. I think the costume design is great. It's very classic adventure fantasy with hints of Art Nouveau. Nothing is as colorful as it was in the books, but the general shape and form of the architecture is the same, and like I said earlier, the architecture of Dinotopia is an important visual representation of the melting pot of cultures it encompasses. I think the special effects are good for their time, it's just this is a TV special from 20 years ago, so it's going to look a little janky, but honestly I think that's part of its charm. The miniseries isn't bad if you have no prior experience with the universe, or if you're not emotionally attached to what the universe in the books represented. I appreciate that this was a childhood favorite for a lot of folks, and that's totally fine. I was just so in love with the world shown in the books that I couldn't get over a lot of the changes that were made when adapting it for television. But it's not atrociously terrible. The same cannot be said of the TV series, which unfortunately does not have David Thewlis to cleanse our palate of stiff line delivery. In fact, no one from the miniseries is present in the TV show. It's all recast. Except for Zippo! Yay, we get to keep looking at this thing. Look, I've made this comment before, but I'm going to make it again because the irony is just too strong. The last time I watched a relatively obscure 13-episode canceled TV series for a YouTube video, I got to look at Weird Al's adorable face, and I enjoyed that a lot more. So, besides Zippo, who actually has a new voice actor, so he was recast too, I guess, we get an entirely new cast playing the same characters. Georgina Rylance plays Marion, Eric Von Detten plays Carl, and their dad Frank, who, by the way, didn't actually die in the miniseries. That was just a classic fake-out. He's played by Michael Brandon, and the New York accent is absolutely hilarious in this setting.
I don't know why. They just don't hunt them down and wipe them out.
Well, you better check your Sunstone manual, Zip, because there's trouble in paradise.
And while I think Shiloh Strong, who replaces Miller as David, does a better job, everyone else is much worse, which is saying something. The Dinotopia TV series ran for 6 episodes on ABC in late 2002, and then it was canceled due to low ratings. However, the last half of the first season had already been made, so they aired the entirety of the first season in Europe in 2003, and then released it on DVD in the US. I'm going to take a moment here to once again thank the Internet Archive and remind everyone to please go support their work. I found disc 3 of the 3-disc set at my local library and nothing else. The Internet Archive, however, has every episode of this show, plus the miniseries, and I am eternally grateful and appreciative to everyone who uploads to and helps maintain the archive and its sister projects, including the Wayback Machine. Anyway, back to my rant. So, the TV series brings back evil T-Rexes and Pteranodons as the main threat, but also introduces a set of human villains. The Outsiders, a gang of rambunctious scallywags who commit such evil deeds as highway piracy and bad table manners. They're led by Lesage, played by Lisa Zane, who is a total baddie and the one fun thing about this series. The TV series is really just your run-of-the-mill Adventure of the Week fantasy show. They go on vaguely dinosaur-themed adventures. Really nothing to write home about. As the series goes on, Carl and his dad Frank become increasingly obsessed with getting off the island. Which, I don't know. I feel like they had to really force this by using the carnivore threat, because if I were to wake up one day on an island of sapient dinosaurs where my lungs weren't in danger of collapsing due to pollution and I didn't have to worry about income tax, I'd probably be good to just stay there. But no, Frank absolutely hates it for some reason, and desperately wants to return to the world of road traffic, HOAs, and Cybertrucks, and he's always trying to find some way off the island despite the fact that someone just gave him a successful bar to run, and he's got this thing going with Baddie Lesage? Like, dude, come on, living the dream here. Some of the episodes are absolutely wacky, though. Like, there's this one where this outsider is trying to make a youth potion out of Stegosaurus spikes, but he screws it up, and when he and Lesage take it, they end up going Benjamin Button, and he turns into dust. Which is better than what they could have had him turn into, I guess. There's another oddly misogynistic episode where Carl and Marion go on a date, and he keeps messing it up by being a horn dog, and he kisses this magical frog that gets him stuck in a time loop of increasingly cringy pickup artist date behavior, and he never really learns his lesson about how to treat women.
Oh, look, I'm just not ready for this. Not yet.
Then why'd you bring me up here?
Excuse me?
Well, yeah, you know, last week at the festival, you were all over me. What were you saying? Next week is Equinox Eve. We could do something really special.
Obviously, something pretty special has to mean.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I think my favorite episode, and I use this phrase very loosely, is the one where David is being picked on by this outsider kid, so his dad sets up a boxing ring in his bar and stages Dinotopia's first ever sport fight, and everyone is massively confused by it. This episode is really a perfect example of how this show could have been good but fails in every way. Because instead of making this into a uniquely Dinotopian conversation about the spectacle of violent entertainment versus combat as a respectable sport, we get Lesage swindling people because they don't understand how gambling works and then drugging David. Like, Lesage is a Dinotopian native too, so where did she learn how to gamble? How are they gambling anyway, using monetary currency when this is supposed to be a society based on barter? Also, Frank and Lesage are besties again at the end of this episode, even though she literally roofied his son to get the piss beaten out of him and rigged Frank's big fight because Lesage is just that much of a baddie, and honestly love that for her. The TV series really goes off the rails in the final few episodes, and we need to talk about it. So Carl gets bitten by this prehistoric mosquito and they have to go find a cure. But oh no! There is no cure because everyone born on Dinotopia is immune to this disease. So they're gonna have to go to the outside world to find a doctor to develop a cure. Because that's how epidemiology works. This actually could have been a really interesting story for this universe, but the way they tell it is just so stupid. So, you know how Dinotopia's whole thing is that you can't leave it? The reasons for this are very clearly and carefully stated in the books. The location of the island is kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. It's filled with dangerous weather patterns not seen anywhere else in the world, and purposefully accessing the island is pretty much impossible. The island is surrounded by dangerous and impassable coral reefs and rogue ocean currents, and there is no deliberate way on or off this island. Unless you're a wizard.
He claimed he was a sorcerer.
That's right. Once upon a time, an actual wizard came to Dinotopia and brought with him a portal that can get people on and off the island, and the council has just been hiding it this whole time. This drives me nuts because magic wasn't really a thing with Dinotopia. Like, the series has this air of magic about it, but everything was very practical, very scientific. The books were filled with charts and diagrams and blueprints, and nothing was accomplished using straight-up magic. But literal wizards just exist in this universe now, and I think that's hilarious. Because where are the rest of the wizards? What ramification does the existence of wizards in this universe have on Dinotopian society? I need answers. But anyway, they have this magic portal, and Marion's mother, Rosemary, behind everyone's back, uses the portal to secretly send David off the island to get help. Because David is the only person on this island who isn't a total dumbass. But Lesage threatens to straight up murder Carl unless she can go with him. So she does. And Carl's baby dinosaur 26 jumps in with them at the last second. So these three run around Budapest for an episode or two trying to find help for Carl, and it's actually pretty funny. There's this very loud, very obnoxious cyberpunk music playing the entire time, and Lesage is just wreaking havoc, and David is so tired, and it's unintentionally so funny. So they find a cure, bring it back to Carl, and all is well. Except it's not, because no one but these three people know that there's a way off the island. And one of them is related to two people who desperately want to leave for some reason. And in the last episode of the series, Carl and Frank find out there's a way off the island, and everyone is arguing about whether or not to let them leave because it could endanger their entire civilization and sow massive unrest, but if they don't, it's basically kidnapping. And it's actually a pretty good bit of drama. Like, this is the kind of interesting interpersonal conflict I wanted to see in a Dinotopian TV series. Give me more of this and less of these atrocious CGI T-Rex attacks. And, spoiler alert, they decide to let them leave. But when they go to use the portal, it's gone. Someone stole it. Roll credits. That's right, the series ends on a massive cliffhanger because they didn't know the show would be canceled. And I don't really have a lot to say about that. I will say, despite my harshness towards it, the TV series got better as it went on. It started leaning more into the conflict that modern-day newcomers to this world might cause and the questions they might have. For instance, the boxing episode, or the one where Frank invents a car and it wreaks havoc and he learns an important lesson about industrialization. And that's what works in a world like this. I liked that later episodes leaned away from the, ooh, scary predators and, ooh, vaguely threatening pirate people living in the woods, and focused more on societal and interpersonal conflict. But it still has all the problems that the Dinotopia miniseries had. The dinosaurs take a massive backseat to everything else, which is a huge failing, and this civilization isn't really a utopia because it doesn't follow any of the utopian rules established in the books. Speaking of the books, I actually think the series would have been much better if it had followed the format of the Dinotopia Digest chapter books. This was the series of kids' chapter books that tied into the main book series. There are 16 of them. I have 7. They're actually pretty hard to find, and I found all of mine in the wild at used bookstores. So I'm pretty proud of my little collection. I have read these 5 here. I am still working my way through Hatchling and Sabretooth Mountain. I do plan to read all of them at some point. But anyway, each of these was written by a different sci-fi or fantasy author. And while they're definitely made for kids, they're actually pretty enjoyable. Each one follows a Dinotopian child on a different standalone adventure, and the adventures not only fit perfectly into the world Gurney created, they flesh out that world in ways that keep it exciting and interesting but don't break the utopian theme. So, for example, River Quest is about a girl named Magnolia and her Lambeosaurus saurian partner, Paddlefoot. Magnolia and Paddlefoot are habitat partners, which is kind of the Dinotopian equivalent of a park ranger or a naturalist, and it's their job to monitor the waterways of Dinotopia. When the main river gets thrown off by an earthquake, they have to go find the source of the disturbance and fix it, and along the way they discover all these old historical artifacts that they have to preserve. Sabretooth Mountain introduces us to the Pleistocene mammals living on Dinotopia and shows us their unique culture. Lost City, which, man, this copy is just in pristine condition. I'm just now noticing that. Man, that's gorgeous. Anyway, Lost City does something similar by showing us a secluded civilization of warrior troodontids. And Chomper, my personal favorite, where's Chomper? Here's Chomper. Chomper takes us right into a clan of Giganotosauruses. Like I said, I didn't end up reading the entire Dinotopia Digest series, but from what I did read, I was very impressed by how they managed to take classic adventure stories and make them work within the rules of the world that Gurney created. It showed that you can have an interesting and dynamic adventure series about dinosaurs without reverting to the same tropes that we've seen used time and time again. If you're looking for a dinosaur adventure series, the Dinotopia TV series aren't terrible. They're not great, but they're not terrible. If you're looking for a Dinotopia series, they're not even good. And again, that's just my slightly pretentious opinion. If you liked these, or if you have good memories of them, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm glad you enjoyed them. I'm glad someone enjoyed them, because I didn't. I'm not going to spend too long on these last few entries in the series because there's not a whole lot to say about them. Quest for the Ruby Sunstone is an animated film from 2005. It changes a lot of stuff, both book and TV canon, and it's just your average straight-to-home release kids movie. It follows 26, who was the baby Chasmosaurus given to Carl in the TV show, but in this movie, her human partner is a guy called John. I don't really know who this guy is, except that he kind of looks like Qui-Gon Jinn. She and her 2 human friends have to stop the evil Ogthar from taking over Dinotopia using the power of the Ruby Sunstone. Now, Ogthar and the Ruby Sunstone are a part of Dinotopia canon. They were introduced in The World Beneath, but the story is very different, and in canon, it's more of a cautionary tale about greed and industrialization. Whereas in this movie, it's just evil, scary bad guy wants to rule the world. Now, there are actually a couple of things I like about Ruby Sunstone. One is that the Sunstones in this movie serve a really interesting purpose that I think would have fit really well into the world of the books if they hadn't been set in the 19th century. The sunstones in this movie trap things like radio waves, satellite signals, and electronic interference, keeping Dinotopia hidden from the outside world. That's really cool, and a great way to answer the question of how does the island stay hidden when outside technology evolves? The other is that the carnivores in this movie, or the one carnivore that we see, fit the presentation in the books. He starts out as a big, scary T-Rex hunting the bumbling evil minion characters, but he's later shown to be reasonable and even helpful towards those who treat him with respect. When 26 pulls a splinter out of his tooth, he becomes a useful ally who imparts great wisdom to the kids when they need it most. I'm also just a fan of gangly T-Rex designs. I think they're adorable. Ruby Sunstone is also kind of interesting because I have a theory that it was the pilot for an animated series that we never got. It introduces multiple characters into this sort of ensemble cast, and the main villain doesn't die. He goes back into the volcano, where it's implied he lies dormant and plans to return. That, to me, says that they had further plans for this iteration of Dinotopia that just never happened. The only other thing worth mentioning about this movie is that the opening scene is this very unfortunately designed kid escaping from an orphanage on a skateboard while jamming to the Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtrack. I just think that deserves to be recognized. The Dinotopia video games are surprisingly not that interesting. Or maybe not surprisingly. There was a DOS game in 1996, and I'm excited writing and reading this portion of my script because I know that's gonna look so cool on screen with the way I do my editing. Just called Dinotopia, and it used one of my favorite things ever in retro video games, which is live-action cutscenes, complete with shockingly complex dinosaur puppets. The puppets were created by the special effects company AFX Studios, headed by Andre Freitas, I hope I said that right, and they did an amazing job. Like, above and beyond for this stupid DOS game. It's possibly my favorite thing I discovered while researching this topic is these dinosaur puppets and the live-action actors because of the level of passion that went into this. Also, it was developed by the Dreamers Guild, otherwise known as the company that made the video game adaptation of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is definitely worth a mention. This game is closest to the world of the books, focused mainly around puzzles and bad top-down exploration. I don't have a lot to say about it except for the thing about the cutscenes, which I just adore. Dinotopia Gameland Activity Center isn't really a video game as much as it was something to keep your kid entertained in 2002. It's just a collection of mini-games for the PC. The Timestone Pirates, also released in 2002, for the Game Boy Advance, is a platformer about stopping pirates from stealing T-Rex eggs. Also, there's a magical stone that can slow down time, I guess. The Sunstone Odyssey is the biggest game, released in 2003 for the Xbox and the GameCube. It's about these two brothers, one who joins the Outsiders and another who is something called a Guardian of Dinotopia. From what I can tell, it follows the lore and world rules of the TV series, which means I am not interested in it. And neither was anyone else, because it has a 44% on Metacritic and everyone says it's really boring. And that's it. There's nothing else. And with that, we've covered every piece of Dinotopia media. It took me forever to go through every piece of this franchise, and I have to say it really made me think. I think James Gurney really did create something special and wholly unique with Dinotopia. To take two such wholly alien worlds as humans and dinosaurs, two of the most powerful dynasties to walk the earth at opposite ends of time, and put them together in a way that allows them to live side by side peacefully is a beautiful concept that deserves recognition and remembrance. Dinotopia speaks not only to our collective fascination with prehistoric life, but also to our collective desire for something better, our need for a world free of war, poverty, and discrimination. It's a vision of the kind of world we all want to live in, one where everyone's individual strengths and value is recognized and uplifted, and where we engage in symbiosis with nature instead of subjugating it. When we hear the word primal or the term primal needs, we focus on our idea of primal as being unevolved or primitive, even prehistoric. But Primal also means fundamental or essential, and the most fundamental and essential needs we have are the need for peace and security, both physically and spiritually. In that sense, Gurney's vision of Dinotopia encompasses the term primal in a beautiful way that could only be done by using creatures that speak to our oldest and most primal selves. As Gurney puts it, what I find compelling is trying to make the impossible seem inevitable. Whether it's a city built on a waterfall or a dinosaur philosopher. It's the vision of the impossible that seems possible that makes this world so compelling. Not only the impossibility of sapient dinosaurs, but the impossible utopia they've created. And it's this creative and peaceful vision that I think modern fantasy is ready to revisit. Fantasy is a wonderful vessel for showing not only a version of our world as it is, but of what our world could be. And while we may not be able to create a world where sauropods replace cars and protoceratopsians translate foreign languages, we can create a society where people respect one another and the world around them to make things better for us all. Breathe deep, seek peace. We've reached the end of this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching and sticking around. It really means a lot that you took the time out to listen to me ramble about talking dinosaurs for however long this video ended up being. I've learned my lesson about making jokes regarding video length while filming because it always ends up being much longer than I think it's going to be. This video is a pretty good example of what you'll see on the channel going forward, although I also do other little things like vlogs, maybe some cosplay stuff, art. I don't know, you tell me what you want to see. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, please leave a like or a comment, subscribe to the channel. It really helps me and it's very appreciated. Even a small comment or a thumbs up really helps me with the algorithm. One raindrop raises the sea, as the Dinotopians would say, or in my case, one comment helps me afford cat food. If you really want to help me out, I have an Etsy store where I sell t-shirts and stuff with designs based on various unappreciated media. I am always looking for new design inspiration, so if there's a design for your favorite fandom that you've always wanted to see and have never found, let me know and I might end up creating it. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to one another, breathe deep, seek peace, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, Severus is eating his food. I hear him crunching. I don't really want to disturb him. You know what? I'm gonna cut it here and I'll just I'll edit in me doing the cat thing later. It's fine. Several hours later. Here's my cat.